refugees in the entire Western Hemisphere. But beyond simply welcoming refugees, I want to refer to the treatment that those citizens receive when they enter our country. In Ecuador, we make special efforts to ensure, to guarantee the rights, and especially, more importantly, the integration of migrants, particularly when we're talking about families whose countries of origin do not offer alternatives of a better life, and these people have no other option other than to flee. For example, 500,000 Venezuelans who today live in Ecuador. We're one of the three main destinations for migrants from this country, and in spite of our budgetary difficulties, we provide assistance to this population with healthcare, education, and other social services. We have also begun a long process of regularization of their status. Just think, Mr. President, what this means in a small country such as ours. Now, think about the impact of a population of that size would have on each one of your countries. This is why I repeat, Ecuador is there for the world. The world can count on Ecuador, and I know that the world will support us with this plan for regularizing the status of our Venezuelan brethren who have had to flee their country. I have a firm hope that this will be the case. But it's not just that. Ecuador is also fulfilling its responsibility in the climate crisis as a country that is the emitter of greenhouse gases. We represent barely 0.18% of global emissions, and yet, without the need to wait or the need to suggest to us, my government took the decision to convert Ecuador in the first country in Latin America and the fourth in the world to adopt a cross-cutting policy towards environmental transition, including creating a special ministry for this. And this is not merely an issue of how much a country has industrialized in the past, but rather how much a country can contribute in the future. This is why almost a year ago, in the framework of the conference, the climate conference in Glasgow, I announced the creation of a new marine reserve called Hermandad, or Brotherhood, in the Galapagos Islands, which increased by 60,000 square kilometers the protected area of this natural heritage site of humanity. That same year, this was further complemented with the signature of a declaration for the preservation and management of ecosystems included in the marine corridor of the East Tropical Pacific. This was we signed this together with my colleagues from the presidents of Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama to provide a new dimension and political impetus to the goals of the Marine Corridor. Thus, we are opening new opportunities for cooperation, financing, and technical assistance for the conservation not only of equatorial biodiversity or regional biodiversity, but rather global biodiversity. But we're more ambitious. We're looking beyond that. It's in this same very institution where we have promoted the mandate of the General Assembly on the environment in order to negotiate a future treaty on the plastic pollution. And so in the area of environmental conservation, Ecuador is also there for the world. Mr. President, in each one of the topics I have mentioned here, in each one of these challenges and uncertainties that the future holds before us, Ecuador supports a conviction that we need to find the responses within ourselves. In our understanding that we as human beings share this planet Earth, and what we have in common is much bigger than what divides us, what separates us. And in fact, it could happen that we are not even aware that we have in our hands keys to solve problems that other nations or other individuals are confronting. In fact, that is what happened with Mateo, the student that we managed to transport from Ukraine. If on each challenge we apply that form of thinking, if we dare to tackle each threat from a common position, we will go much farther. For example, take the food crisis, which today has been aggravated by the conflict in Ukraine, and that has meant the worsening of malnutrition in various countries. International figures speak of 52 million children younger than 5 years of age that today suffer malnutrition. 17 million suffer from acute malnutrition, and 155 million suffer from stunted growth. In Ecuador, this problem affects some 30% of children younger than 2 years of age, and in the most tragic cases in some of our poorest provinces, the figure is above 35% of malnutrition. To confront this problem, my government has been a pioneer. We have created a technical secretariat. It's called Ecuador Develops Without Child Malnutrition, and I have set a very clear goal for my term: reduce during my term of government by 6 percentage points the malnutrition of children, and we have ensured the participation of civil society, academia, the private sector, and local governments in these efforts. And however, we can certainly do even more. We can dare to think as a global community. I won't be revealing any kind of secret to you if I tell you how fertile is the land in Ecuador, how productive our land is. If that land is worked with optimism and dedication. We are the country where cocoa is grown, banana, where we produce shrimp, but also avocado and a lot of other agricultural goods. It makes no sense that our children, or children from anywhere in the world, suffer hunger. In this situation or any other situation, and especially given that the land is there to be harvested, not only for food but also for opportunities. This new Ecuador today represents advantages that could serve not only to ease hunger but also to create this world that is more stable and peaceful that I mentioned, where citizens are included on every single day, feel more included through the creation of opportunities. That is the world that I see. That is the world that today we are proposing to you from Ecuador. Lastly, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, said, peace is a form of being, of relating to others, of living on this planet. It cannot be decreed only through treaties. It must be nourished with rights and the abilities and skills of every single individual. End of quote. I believe that in very few words that encapsulates the spirit of what I've tried to say, and I will take this opportunity to express the support of Ecuador for the efforts of the Secretary General, the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. I would like to, in conclusion, thank everyone for the overwhelming support for the election of my country as a member of the Security Council for the period 2023-2024. Our participation will take place in a context in which humankind is experiencing a period of uncertainty and unprecedented challenges. But you can always be certain that, as we have always done, Ecuador will be there, fulfilling its duty to the world. We will conduct ourselves with coherency and transparency, with an emphasis on supporting humanitarian assistance and peacekeeping operations, on the protection of civilians in situation of armed conflict, on the agenda of women, peace and security, on the fight against arms trafficking, and always addressing emerging challenges in the context of sustaining peace. In all this, and each decision, and each effort at mediation, and each opportunity to contribute to the stability and peace of our planet, you can be certain, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, that Ecuador will be there for you and for your citizens. Ecuador will be there for the world. Thank you very much for your kind attention for this intervention. May God bless us all.
I wish to thank the Constitutional President of the Republic of Ecuador for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Republic of Zambia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Republic of Zambia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Korosi, President of the 77th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first, we congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election as the seventh President of the UN General Assembly. With your vast experience, we're confident that you will successfully provide the required leadership during your tenure as President of the General Assembly. We pay tribute, of course, in the same manner to Mr. Abdallah Shahid for his unwavering dedication and good stewardship during the 76th session of the General Assembly. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, we meet here at a very difficult time, a time when global challenges have not only multiplied, but have become more complex. Such challenges include the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate change, the war in Ukraine, and the associated effects of the supply chain disruptions, food insecurity around the world, the high commodity and energy prices, as well as the overall high cost of living, which have cast a dark shadow on the attainment of the SDGs on our continent. The risk and the world. The risk of reversal in the hard-won developmental gains is ever so real. COVID-19 unmasked the global inequalities which stretch well beyond income and political boundaries, as evidenced through the varied access to vaccines. The risk of further inequality is also real, especially for us developing countries which have inadequate capacity to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change, despite our insignificant carbon footprint. Sadly so. This is truly a defining moment of our time, where collective efforts must be channeled to address the numerous challenges that we face. Mr. President, it is why Zambia welcomes the challenge on building our common agenda and endorse the call to convene the summit for the future. We call for the attainment of a pact for the future that underwrites a new form of multilateralism in our world, one where major challenges are faced together in solidarity within a context of revitalized international order that is rules-based, number one, number two, fair and inclusive, number three, with the United Nations at the center of it all. As a country with two-thirds of our population below the age of 25, the outlook on the future and emphasis on intergenerational equity is so important to us. Our government seeks to harness this democratic dividend by investing in its youthful population and energetic members of our population for a better future. We therefore support the establishment of the UN Youth Office at the UN here. This should encourage meaningful youth engagement in diverse ways, such as in political representation, access to lifelong skills training and education, support to youth innovation, and indeed entrepreneurship, decision-making, and all the spheres of life, including climate change and environmental protection. Mr. President, in spite of the steady progress made towards curbing the COVID-19 pandemic, we still need to remain vigilant to guard against the possibility of its resurgence. We have all experienced the negative impact of the pandemic, particularly the loss of millions of our loved ones, lives across the world, disruption in social economic activities. As the world continues to recover from this pandemic, it is therefore necessary to find lasting solutions, including investment in resilient health systems that will respond to future pandemics of the likes that we have witnessed with the COVID-19, just amongst others. This entails the establishment of a versatile international public health regime that will be devoid of hoarding vaccines and related technologies to guarantee rapid deployment of supplies, indeed from a global reserve to tackle future pandemics. Mr. President, the re-emergence of polio in our world is of great concern, and as such, Zambia is participating in supplementary immunization activities along with a number of countries in our region in order to prevent and halt the spread of wild poliovirus type 1. This is in addition to ongoing activities to fight other vaccine-preventable diseases such as measles, as well as to strengthen our routine immunization and maintain essential health services for maternal and child health. As the Globe Cholera Control Champion, and many thanks to the WHO who gave us this opportunity to serve in this role. Our fight against cholera must continue with vigor, relentlessly with vigor. We also need to remain alert to any possible outbreaks of monkeypox, Ebola virus, and indeed other threats in our world. The international community must work together to address the growing threat to environmental, human, and animal health resulting from antimicrobial resistance, commonly referred to as drug resistance. Drug resistance, bacterial infections continue to cause millions of deaths, where, for example, in particular, sub-Saharan Africa has the greatest burden of resistance bacterial infections, accounting for a greater proportion of deaths in our regions. This calls for greater control systems in access to antimicrobial medicines for both human and animal use. I shall now focus on other areas of interest. Economic performance. Mr. President, the Ukraine crisis has hampered the recovery that was slowly taking hold, particularly in the developing world, where large sections of our society remain in extreme poverty and the inequalities widen by the day. With the attainment of the SDGs off track, countries must intensify national consultative processes and stakeholder engagements and renew commitments to poverty reduction, tackle energy poverty, support debt restructuring, and enhance access to concessional finance, very important to our own development agendas in our individual countries. On our part, we hereby indicate this, in this regard, our intention to present our second voluntary national review in July 2023 to highlight Zambia's progress towards sustainable development goals, achievement of. Despite the challenges in the external environment, we are resolved to rebuild the Zambian economy, and this resolve remains strong ever before. Our economic recovery is on track, Mr. President, evidenced by the positive growth indicators and stabilization of key macro variables such as what? Interest rate regime, indeed, exchange rate market stability, inflation, which we have been able to pull down from 25% to well under 9.8% in just 1 year of being in office. Mr. President, Zambia is on a path of growth from the economic contraction that we experienced in the past, which was somewhere in the region of -2%, and to GDP estimated now just under a year to grow at about 3%. When you add -2 and 3% growth, it means we've grown by about 5% in the last 12 months. This is something that has been difficult to achieve, but with a lot of hard work, we've been able to do it. But we want to do more. Effectively, in terms of social economic benefits, our commitment to providing equal opportunities, especially for the young people, has been demonstrated by the introduction of free primary and secondary education, as we believe that education is the best equalizer. Education is the best investment. Education is the best inheritance, without doubt. Consistent with our pledge to invest in human capital, we have recruited over 30,000 teachers, 11,000 health workers in 2022 alone. We are decentralizing, Mr. President, our service delivery and have increased the allocation of Constituency Development Fund by over 1,000 percentage points in our first budget in office. Just the beginning. Expenditure of these funds at community level is meant to ensure inclusive and sustainable economic growth that will support SME development and employment creation across all our 10 provinces, 156 constituencies in our country. We are pleased, I'm pleased to note that we have reached, in principle, agreement with our creditors under the common framework to restructure the national debt which we inherited, and have effectively concluded an IMF deal based on our more important homegrown economic transformation plan. We say many thanks to the International Monetary Fund, to the World Bank, and basically the UN system and other cooperating partners for your support. Climate change. Mr. President, the adverse effects of climate change have continued to ravage our planet. In addressing the emerging global crisis on climate change, allow me to cite a situation in Zambia where recently one half of our country experienced total crop failure due to extreme drought, and another half of our country experienced floods in one season. This is obviously not normal. Climate change, negative effect. Such extreme weather events are a timely reminder of the grave consequences of climate change. We therefore need robust solutions and cohesion in our approach at the global and regional levels to address effects of climate change, without doubt. As chair of the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change, Mr. President, Zambia calls for enhanced global efforts in addressing climate change, which should include increased financial support for countries with limited resources to mitigate, indeed, to adapt to the effects of and negative climate change issues. Zambia has mainstreamed a green growth and climate change, proofing it in the current National Development Plan, which has articulated broad policy measures on transitioning Zambia into a climate resilient and inclusive green economy over time. 3, gender. Mr. President, Zambia has continued to build on the efforts of attaining gender equality and inclusivity in various sectors of our society. Based on empirical evidence, women empowerment and poverty alleviation are positively correlated, I must say. It is therefore imperative that we dedicate corresponding efforts to ensure that gender disparities are curtailed at all levels. Mr. President, Zambia, under our national gender policy, has been implementing affirmative action in favor of women and girls to ensure that their full potential is realized not once but all times. Ending child marriage. Mr. President, to complement these measures, Zambia is championing the campaign to end child marriage in Africa and, of course, in the world. In the same vein, we are proud to inform this assembly that this morning, Zambia, Canada, and other cooperating partners held a side event to galvanize support and review commitment from the international community towards ending child early forced marriages. With the assurances made during this event, we are hopeful that we shall be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal of Gender Equality Target 5.3 in our programming that aims at eliminating this harmful practice, without doubt. International peace, security, and stability. Mr. President, the world at large has grappled with growing instability and insecurity within the last year, and the effects have been felt by millions of people around the world as across the world. Zambia believes that without peace and stability, our joint developmental efforts are in vain, totally in vain. As such, we are committed to remain strong advocates of peace and stability in Southern Africa and the entire African continent and the world over. Our guiding principle is that instability, Mr. President, anywhere is instability everywhere. This reminds us that ending war and conflict is not only the responsibility of those that are directly involved in the conflict, but it's a shared obligation of every global citizen and indeed every nation. I mean all of us without exception, Mr. President. We cannot afford to allow instability to derail our programs, noble programs to better the lives of our people. We therefore take this matter seriously and shall continue to actively participate in efforts to restore peace in all the troubled regions of our global village. As the incoming chair of the SADC organ on politics, defense, security cooperation, Zambia prioritized the restoration of peace and stability in our own country, to start with, and the region. As it is said, Mr. President, charity begins at home. At the continental level, Zambia remains engaged and committed to the efforts of the African Union, the United Nations in promoting peace in various conflict areas around our global community. Going forward, our UN system should, we argue, Mr. President, tilt more efforts towards prevention of conflicts, which is more cost-effective and palatable, I shall say. Zambia, as a signatory to various disarmament treaties and conventions, remains committed to promoting global peace and security. Mr. President, Zambia joins other governments in expressing particular concern about the ongoing war in Ukraine. As we stand with all those affected, both inside Ukraine and in the neighboring countries, we also take this opportunity to stress the far-reaching negative consequences of this war, particularly on the prices of food across the world, fuel, fertilizer, and other key commodities. War in any part of the world, Mr. President, has a damaging effect on economic activity, which derails our collective fight against poverty and hunger. Mr. President, a few months of war can erase decades of progress. I shall repeat this. A few months of war can take note of this. We therefore categorically condemn war anyway, and we continue to urge all parties involved to pursue diplomatic solutions to conflict resolution. Let me repeat, our UN, and I want to emphasize this, our UN should continue with its peace efforts in this particular conflict, and your efforts, Mr. President, our collective efforts, are well recognized, and thank you for that. UN reforms. Mr. President, we wish to stress that global ambitions toward peace and security largely depend on the effectiveness of the United Nations Security Council. The inadequacies of the current structure of the Security Council, however, have become increasingly pronounced, with ceding of decision-making on matters of global peace and security to the General Assembly that otherwise would have been its preserve. That's a preserve of the Security Council. But this burden is now pushed to the General Assembly. I think this is not correct. This brings to the fore the need for the long overdue reforms of the UN Security Council. We appreciate the call from President Biden for greater inclusivity in the Security Council. We therefore continue to advance the African common position as espoused in the Ezulwin Consensus and the CITES Declaration to ensure the effectiveness, credibility, and legitimacy of our UN Security Council. In conclusion, Mr. President, we wish to reaffirm Zambia's commitment to the fundamental principles which the United Nations was founded upon, which safeguard our shared future, indeed, of peace, prosperity for all nations, not for some nations. I shall emphasize that peace and stability and prosperity for all nations. Mr. President, I thank you for your kind attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Zambia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to his court, His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Angie Rajoelina, President of the Republic of Madagascar. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Angie Rajoelina, President of the Republic of Madagascar, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le
ဘာလို့
Président de
အ
la
မေရိကန်အလံချုပ်
Mr.
လာတာ
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of State and
မင်း
Government,
ဘာလဲမင်းတို့ငါ့ကိုမမင်းနဲ့
delegates,
မင်းတို့မင်းနဲ့မေကုန်အဖြစ်ပြီးမယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ငါပေးရအဖြစ်ကမင်းတို့ကမေကုန်ဖြစ်ပြီ
ladies and
မင်း
gentlemen,
တို့ဖြစ်နိုင်ပါမယ်
distinguished guests. Allow me
မင်းဖြစ်
at
နိုင်
the
အောင်မေကုန်နဲ့
outset
မင်း
to address Mr. Kovazi,
Mm-hmm.
Director
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
Environmental
Mm-hmm.
Sustainability in
မင်းတို့
the
ဘာလို့
office
အမေရိကန်
of
အ
the
လံ
President of Hungary.
အမေရိကန်
Mr. President, your
Tamara
election to
Jobiden.
the presidency
So,
of the
စာရမ်းပါခေါင်းကြီးနဲ့
77th General
and then you
Assembly of
chose
the United
ဘာလို့
Nations
ဝင်လာတယ်လဲ
is a clear message about the roadmap established by this
President,
annual
American
meeting
Tamara
of
Jobiden.
nations. Mr.
ဆိုရင်
President,
နိုင်ငံသမ္မတ
please
ဂျိုးဘိုင်ဒန်အာ
accept
ဆီယံတို့
my
လာရောက်
warmest
အမေရိကန်
congratulations.
လိုင်းရချုပ်လို့
Secretary General, I convey to you my deep gratitude
ဘာလို့လဲ
for your continued commitment and your devotion in
Hello, Chairman
in your
Biden.
leadership of
အမေရိကန်သမ္မတ
the
ဂျိုးဘိုင်ဒန်
United
အာဆီယံကို
Nations
လာရောက်အမေရိကန်လိုင်း
organization.
ရချုပ်ပြီးအာဆီယံကိုလာ
On
ရောက်
behalf
ပြုလုပ်ပါတ
of
ယ်
the Malagasy people, I also
Yes,
wish to
Chairman,
take the
we-
opportunity offered to
Chairman,
me
we-
by this illustrious rostrum to reiterate our deepest condolences to the British
အာဆီယံ
people.
အာရှတိုက်တွေဂျပန်
Queen
အာရှ
Elizabeth
တိုက်
II inspired many
အာရှတိုက်နဲ့
generations
ဂျပန်
in her
ဘာလို့
country
ဒုတိယပါဆို
and throughout the world. I also
မင်း
wish
တို့ကလေးသူတို့လေးနိုင်ငံ
to
ဟာလေး
convey my congratulations and
ဘယ်လို
our
ငါ
wish
ဆက်ရဘာလာလို့လဲ
for a reign full of health and blessings to His
Well,
Majesty
I
King
don't
Charles
know.
III. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the annual meeting of the United Nations at the General Assembly is always an opportunity to raise the banner of our
Maybe,
aspirations,
မိပြီးရက
namely the
Like,
action
okay.
which brings us all together here, that
And
is
they-
universal peace. Now that
မင်း
we've
တို့ကအာရှ
learned
တိုက်တွေ
to
ဘာလာလောက်တာ
live with
အမေ
COVID-19 that we have discussed at
American
length
idea.
over the last 2 years, we are, in spite of everything,